Everybody, and welcome to Navigating Accommodation Letters. I'm Dr. Jess Bloch-Narin. I'm the Faculty Inclusion Fellow for Disability Difference and Accommodation here at Cal State San Bernardino. And I hopefully have some really useful information to share so that when you receive an accommodation letter, and it really isn't necessarily an if, it's definitely a when, because we have about 2,000 registered students with our accommodations office, and probably even more on our campus that aren't registered with our office for accommodations. And so when and as you receive these accommodation letters, it's an easy and smooth and familiar process for you, right? We know that lots of people teach on our campus in lots of different capacities. So there are folks that have been here full time or tenured for decades. And then there's folks that teach one class here and classes at 9 different other institutions. And so our experiences of navigating, institutional processes, including accommodations processes on our campus, can really be different based upon our relationship with the institution. However, some things tend to remain a constant. And some of those constants include what you're going to be getting and your resources that you can always count on to support you in the process. And so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to walk you through some of that today, right? I want to share with you how and why an accommodation letter gets generated. And then also, I want to share with you some real life redacted accommodation letters so that you can see and anticipate some of what you might be getting in any given term, kind of demystifying the process and thinking about what it means when it says this, what I do if I don't know what it means when it says this, etc. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And we'll go ahead and get started. So this is Navigating Accommodation Letters, and I am just super happy to be here with you. So I'm just getting myself and my Zoom a little bit organized here. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and get started. So that you know, for those of you catching the live presentation, this is a 2-screen experience, and you can always join in and ask questions at any time by scanning the QR code or putting in the website and code below. And there is always a space to anonymously ask me questions in this presentation. So who am I? Right. So I'm Dr. Jess Bloch-Narin. I was the former interim faculty director for our accommodations office. And now I'm the faculty inclusion fellow for disability difference and accommodation. So professionally, I've had the pleasure of working at the scope of the institution on accommodations for our disabled students, right? I'm homegrown here at San Bernardino. I'm an alumni of the EDD in Educational Leadership, and I completed that degree here in 2021. My dissertation and subsequent research is on disability inclusion in higher ed, including as editor and chapter author of Rethinking Perception and Centering the Voices of Unique Individuals, Reframing Autism Inclusion in Praxis. And so that book came out in 2022 and features a number of our faculty colleagues here around the campus community. When I'm not doing all this, I am also full-time faculty in the Department of Communication Studies, and I'm a parent advocate of that wonderful kid in orange on your screen. That's his favorite color, if you can't tell. And he is now newly a young adult who's a person with autism, and he's open about that. And he uses that language. He calls himself a person with autism. And he's also a pediatric cancer survivor. So I'm in the work. I'm passionate about the work, both as a scholar, researcher, practitioner, but then also as a family advocate and a person who walked alongside a self-advocate while also being a single parent long, long ago. So these are questions for those of you catching this on the recording. These are questions for a reflection. So here are some things to think about, right? How often do you refer to SSD, right? How often do you refer to the accommodations office, right? Do you refer when you notice that something might be going on? Do you notice that something might be going on and then go, I don't want to I don't want to assume, or that could be a weird conversation. Do you refer all the time? What is it like for you as you think about having conversations around disability, right? And maybe it's that you're leading others and saying, hey, like maybe that person should get to SSD. Like maybe you should talk with SSD about what you're seeing. And the reason that I ask this is because um, we have such a deep connection to our students in our classrooms that we may legitimately see something that's going on, maybe a new disability or a change in disability status or something unique about a student's experience in this term that then is touching how they experience the world, which could qualify them as a person with a disability with the accommodations office. We may see it first, right? We may have a student who is accommodated for all kinds of written activities, and we may have an oral class. We may have students who are accommodated for all kinds of written and oral activities, and then we may have an art class or like a physical education class. And then all of a sudden, again, new setting, new circumstances, new space and time, and we may be the first to notice something. So one thing I want to encourage you is that this really is a collaborative process between your accommodations office and yourself as a faculty member. Right. Some of the really common resources that we offer include the following, but definitely aren't limited to the following, right? Because anything and many things could be a reasonable accommodation based on the process of understanding a student's functional limitation. So I'll describe in a future slide how that happens. But for now, some of the common accommodations that you may see in accommodation letters that come to you as an instructor of record, sometimes you may see something like note-taking, right? Either peer note-taking or automated note-taking. You might see class recording where a student can independently basically attend your class a second time, right, through the recording. Test proctoring and accommodation, right? So a student may test in the SSD offices. There might be accommodations related to that testing, right? That it might be extra time, it might be a quieter space. It might involve different things, right? We have students with the test accommodation that they can bring water with them into the testing space based on their unique disability and unique needs, right? You may also see things like requests in your class, right? So that could be access to alternate seating arrangements. That could also be provision of classroom materials such as slide decks, okay? Um, so really and truly, many things might be a reasonable accommodation and they're gotten at in a very specific way, okay? But one thing that's useful to know in regards to accommodations is that different things that are, and welcome to Rebus who's joining us. Happy to see you. So I'm recording because I think that some folks are going to be catching this on recording. But for our live attendees, I'm happy to see you. So some of our common accommodations and what's needed from faculty include students independently working with SSD. Oh, and I also invite our guests to chime in on any of this because they know a couple things about it. But student independently works with SSD could include things like priority registration, right? Like as a faculty member, we don't really do anything with priority reg. It just exists for our students, right? That's a process between the accommodations office and the registrar's office. So like as a classroom instructor, we don't need to do anything with that. We might see it on a letter, but we don't need to do anything, right? Similarly, disability counseling, resourcing with other campus resources. These are things that get done really independently by the student working with their accommodations office. Something like a personal attendant are actually provided by outside community resources. So again, we would be resourcing that student with a personal care attendant with the community resources for them to get a personal care attendant independently and bring that person in, right? So that's different from this green area you see here, which is kind of under a different theme. So that theme is student needs their accommodations to be granted access to class. Okay, so sometimes a student's accommodation walks in the door with the student. So what do I mean when I say that, right? Sometimes it's metaphorically and sometimes it is literally. So a student may have an accommodation. A faculty member may receive notification in an accommodation letter that a student has a service animal, right? That service animal is going to walk into class with the student. A student may have sign language interpreting. If that's a live interpreter, that interpreter is going to walk into class with the student. If it's a Zoom class, that interpreter is going to show up with the student. That's really important because in order for that student to have access, that accommodation facilitator, excuse me, there might be one more kicking around. Excuse me, that facilitator of that accommodation needs access to class as well. So as a faculty member, we don't have to do anything as, for instance, that sign language interpreter arrives, other than just not turning them away, right? Peer note-taking is typically another classmate in class who would then take notes and upload them to the accommodation office. Transcription and captioning would be in collaboration with SSD, getting those materials to a place where they could be transcribed and captioned. Okay. A third theme is student needs a little bit of your input. Okay, so this is kind of going from like nothing needed of faculty to a little bit more, but for all the right reasons, right? So a little bit of your input. Zoom interpreting. We got to make sure that the interpreter is able to get into the room. Zoom note taking. We need the Zoom note taker to get into the room, whether that's the automated note taker or whether that's a peer note taker. Somebody needs to know the Zoom link. If we don't know the Zoom link, we can't do stuff by Zoom. Alternative formats, right? In theory, in order for a book or classroom content to go into an alternative format, so that's like a screen reader or a different way of providing information, a brailler, there does need to, like, we need to know what the readings are for the class, right? If there's a textbook in with the bookstore, great, we'll convert it. If there's not a textbook in with the bookstore, or for instance, if you have copyright legal levels of scanned materials, we won't know that you have those scanned materials that are part of the course content unless you tell the SSD office. We're not in your classes, we're not observing you, we're not scrutinizing you. So we actually don't know. Like, we have so much confidence in you as my faculty colleagues that we trust that maybe the reading is just the book unless you tell us otherwise. But let's say you're like me and you try to provide a lot of stuff legally for free for your students, because guess what? Being a college student is expensive. Then the SSD office, the accessibility office, they don't know that that content's there unless I tell someone. So we need to rely on each other to share that information across. The next theme is student needs a few minutes of class or prep time. Okay. So that can include alternative seat assignments, changes in lighting. So let's say alternative seat assignments. If it's a really packed classroom, you might need to save a seat. If it's like right, left, front, back, if someone's using the alternative desk who's not the student who needs the alternative desk, they might need us for a hot second. That might be part of setting up our classroom too, right? I have a student in one of my classes who's accommodated with front of the room seating, and my class is really packed. So he and I developed a code system where I put a card on a desk for him, and no one else knows why that card is there. They just don't sit there. And then he sits and he takes the card. And we worked out a plan to make sure that without outing the student or identifying the student or causing any kind of like undue attention on the student, that he gets what he needs in accordance with his accommodation letter, right? Similarly, remote instruction, sometimes it's turning on Zoom. Like, we've got options, right? It might be that we turn on Zoom, or it might be that a class aide comes in to turn on Zoom on a laptop for us, right? And class slides, if a student has the assigned accommodation of class slides, maybe we just need to send them across, but that's it. There's nothing else needed, right? Lastly, there's the theme of student needs your active participation. So if the student has testing, proctored testing, your accommodations office needs to hear from you, right? Because they don't know how to replicate your testing environment unless you share that with them. So here's what I mean when I say that, right? Let's say you teach a math class and everyone's allowed to have a graphing calculator in class. We don't know that unless you tell us that in the testing contract. So you'll get a testing contract and it'll say things like, what is every student able to bring into class with them? What is the testing environment for your non-proctored students? And then you might say, oh, everyone can bring a graphing calculator, but they can only bring one, right? Or whatever it is, right? And then we will replicate that environment and then bring online that student's accommodations in addition to replicating that environment. But we have to know what that environment is, and we can only really get that information from you because, again, we're not in class with you. Alternative assignments. Let's say a student is receiving chemotherapy in a hospital inpatient, and there's a field trip with like a writing component while on the field trip. That student may not be able to go. So we might need to work with you to say, hey, since that student is currently, due to their disability and qualifying condition, unable to attend the field trip, how can we come up with an alternative assignment for this time, right? Based on their functional limitations. So that involves your active participation. Similarly, updates to Canvas. So let's say you change all the readings midterm, right? We won't know that unless you tell us. Extensions for assignments, we need to know what we work that out together. It's not a hard and fast, time and a half kind of situation because everyone's assignments are so different. Lots of people scaffold things. There can be like active learning components. So this is really something that involves the faculty members' active participation. Similarly, like videos made, in class by students that then need captioning. They may not exist before the term, and we won't know that this is going to be part of the class content. So this is a great example of an opportunity for us to actively participate with each other. So that was a lot, but just remember, it all fits on one page that you can access on our SSD website under faculty resources at any time. All right, where do accommodations come from? So students meet with a counselor in what's called an interactive process, right? So the interactive process is involved. Counselors and students, they meet for almost a full hour. And what they talk about in that hour is any areas of functional limitation, right? So these are like trained, skilled disability counselors who really do a deep granular dive with the student in an interactive process to understand that student's unique areas of functional limitations, right? And really that's just a fancy word for like, what barriers are you facing? And then that counselor assigns accommodations based on the functional limitations. And really those accommodations can be a lot of things, right? So sometimes I'll give you an example. When you see like e-readers or Kurzweil, right? Some students just read text better if it's on a colored background. So sometimes Kurzweil is used just to put it on a colored background. Um, is it an advantage for the general population to have your reading on a colored background? No, it's just reading your text on a different background, right? And at the same time, it might help that student significantly, right? Without causing any kind of fundamental alteration to the course. It just takes a second for us to get it into a format that helps them. However, one thing that's important to mention is that fundamental alteration isn't, so let's say it's my class, right? As a faculty member, I can't decide alone that it's a fundamental alteration. As an accommodations office, they can't decide alone if it is or is not a fundamental alteration. That only gets decided by a due process panel, which can be convened at any time if there ever is a concern about something like that, right? But it's a due process where someone really takes an opportunity as faculty to like crack open our course and look at everything and understand where we're coming from as faculty members in order to answer that question, right? So it's a multiple person process to figure out if something's a fundamental alteration. And all that comes from all kinds of good stuff. Inside the CSU, it comes from EO 1111, which is about disability inclusion and accommodation. Coded Memo 2014-08, which is like the nitty gritty of how the Chancellor's Office says that our Cal States can and should rise to the occasion of doing the accommodating and including. And the Coded Memo 2007-04, which is about accessible technology, in addition to kind of like the gold standard of federal law, which is ADA in Section 504. So other unique circumstances that might get touched related to accommodation include fieldwork, clinical student teaching placements, internships, anything where our students going to another setting to do their learning for course credit, or co-curricular activities, such as how do we help to facilitate accommodations for non-credit bearing opportunities on our campus, right? Like housing a residential life, right? That student we might be collaborating with many of our campus partners on a regular basis. Okay. But what do I do when I get a letter? So talk to SSD. The best way to talk to SSD is not necessarily to be like, oh, I know one person over there, but just email straight into the thread, right? SSD runs 3 shifts a day. So we are open every single hour that campus is open and that there's classes being run, right? So that is from early in the morning until late at night and on Saturdays. So instead of going to one person, go to all of us. It's okay. Like that's a confidential email. Go to SSD at CSUSB and ask your questions directly there, right? Similarly, go to me, right? jessica.nairn@csusb.edu, and you'll have my contact at the end and beginning of this presentation. But go to me. Anytime you need me, you always have me, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. In addition, I do have 4.5 hours of faculty drop-in hours every single week, specifically for my faculty colleagues. Do the metacognition thing. Why do I have this here? What does that mean? Ask yourself as you're looking at a letter, like, what do I know? What do I not know? What do I need to know that I don't know? Right? Like interrogate yourself a little bit to know what those sticking points might be so that you can talk to us early and often. Utilize the SSD resources for faculty. There's actually a video and a glossary definition of essentially every single accommodation that you might commonly receive on a letter. And do what you can to approach this process with an open heart and an open mind. SSD is in the business of very custom-built custom houses, right? Because of that interactive process, because of assigning accommodations based on functional limitation. So every single person's human experience is so different. So every single person's accommodations are so different too. So that's why I always encourage an open heart and an open mind. I'm going to share with you a couple of real life accommodation letters with the information redacted on them. And these links are up, so you could always refer back to them as well. But the first one is here, right? So you'll always see something at the top. It'll say the term, it'll say the name of the class in the section, and then it'll say SSD has assigned these accommodations to the student, because the student is qualified. Here's some of the guiding policy that we use to assign those accommodations. And please keep this information confidential, right? So in this accommodation letter, it says, here's what this student is receiving, right? They're receiving an eText screen reader at some level, right? So that means, remember, we went through that sliding scale of involvement. It means we need to know what your readings are, right? Alternative furniture and seating, the student is going to sit at an alternate table and chair. So for instance, if you go into your class and there is no alternate table and chair, tell us, right? We do check, but that doesn't mean that people don't move things. Our desks and tables aren't tied down. So if someone gets a really brilliant idea of like, oh, I'm going to use this to prop open a door, and then lo and behold, something can go missing, right? So if you notice something different or missing, talk to us early and often. Like, the institution is here to support and to rise to the occasion of doing institutional stuff. Okay, alternative testing, distraction-free environment, extra time, JAWS, that's like another way to get information into a different format, Scantron assistance, and scribed exam. So this student's probably going to proctor in our center and then receive a lot of stuff. So what you can count on for this is that there's going to be some kind of testing contract sent to you, and you can usually find those. There'll be a testing agreement if a student has a testing contract or testing accommodations at the very bottom of that letter. Okay, so let's say you're like, I don't even have tests. Great. If you don't have tests, you have already met the testing accommodations because there is no testing, right? But if you do have tests, then here's things to look for. Assignment accommodations, extended time on assignments, right? So that's something that's agreed upon between the student and faculty, and usually initiated by the student. So the student will go, hey, excuse me, Dr. So-and-so, I'd like to request extra time on this related to my accommodations. I think I'm really going to need some extra time. And then that faculty member can say things like, okay, I can give you 3 days. I can give you till the end of the term. I can give you an extra week because this is scaffolded assignment. So then I need you to be up on the next part. There's lots of options there, but we know our classes the best as faculty. So the important thing is to give some kind of extended time on assignments, but it's also within the context of our class. Okay. Mobility services, as faculty, we don't have to do anything with this. It means that student's going to receive cart rides from the SSD office. Note-taking services, this essentially means there's going to be a peer note taker, and we might be opening our classroom for a minute to recruit a peer note taker. And then class aid, evacuation assistance, service animal, and visual impairment orientation, right? So the student may come to class with a service animal. This is just a heads up for you to know that. They're going to need help in an emergency, and that's like a whole other video. But the institution will rise to the occasion there as well. They may receive a class aid for assistance, and that would be provided by our office. And then related to the extended time, this says extended time on assignments is to be communicated and collaborated between student and professor. Okay, so this is a student with a pretty involved accommodation letter. But now you've read through one with me and you've seen a little bit more about what that might look like. Okay, let me show you another one. And just so you know too, as I'm pulling these, this is about functional limitations. This is about something that could get in the way of that student accessing their coursework. So for instance, that, we might be able to guess certain things about the student, or when we meet the student, they may share certain things with us. But because this is in the language of functional limitation, we don't necessarily need to know, and their right to privacy and confidentiality mean they have the right to not share that information with us, their medical diagnosis. Okay, so this is in the language of functional limitation, not in the language of medical diagnosis. But we can still read through it and figure out what it is that we need to be doing just by thinking about the functional limitations and the accommodations for those functional limitations. Okay, so here's an example. The header is always the same, right? Please keep it confidential. These are assigned accommodations. The student, alternative furniture and seating, alternative table, chair not needed, right? So let's say the chair is like really tucked in there. Maybe this is saying the student might be like a wheelchair user or a power chair user, where the desk helps them, but the chair is actually in the way. So as we're prepping our class, if we see the chair like jammed in there, that might be really hard for them to resolve. So we might pull the chair out so that way they can access the table without the chair, right? This might be an email to ask them, hey, I noticed the class before us, they always slam the chair in there. In a private moment, if you have a preference about how I set this up for you, since it's always seems to be defaulting to that, please let me know. Right. Maybe they're like, no, like there's an opportunity for us to have conversations, right? Those conversations aren't necessarily like, do I have to, or like, well, but those conversations can be like, of the 100 ways I can fulfill this accommodation, which of these 100 ways actually just works best for you? I'm a yes on the accommodation, but where would you, do you want to move the chair if the chair is there, or do you prefer that I get the chair out of there? Right? That's a very reasonable question. Seating in front of classroom, right? So maybe that desk is in the back all the time. So then that minute of prep time might be getting that table, but not the chair, to the front of the room. Okay, mobility services. So the student also receives cart rides, but we don't have to do anything with that in our classroom. And then evacuation assistance. Okay, so because there's not a testing accommodation, there's also not a testing contract for the student. Okay. Last accommodation letter example. All right. So header is the same. The student receives accommodations under ADA and 504. Alternative formats, Kurzweil, right? So this student is going to receive alternative formats of their readings. That means if we have readings in Canvas and nowhere else, we need to tell someone, just tell us at ssd@csusb.edu. Tell me at jessica.nairn at csusb.edu. We'll make sure it gets to the right place. We work really closely in collaboration with Kevin Kleppy's Office of Accessibility. And so sometimes the place for some remediation in regards to additional materials beyond a course textbook might be in collaboration with his office. But if you just tell us, we'll make sure to help every which way we can to facilitate that. So you don't have to, I know you're busy, right? We're all busy when we teach. If you just tell us, like, the institution will rise to the occasion with you and alongside you, okay? Alternative testing, distraction-free environment, and extra time. Okay, so I bet you we're going to see a testing contract here. And we do, right? So that's something like we need to click through that. We need to provide information about what our testing environment looks like, right? Extended time on assignments. Again, that's going to be agreed on together. Electronic note taking. So this student is going to basically receive AI note taking. So there's going to be a bot that transcribes the course and summarizes the course, orally delivered content in class into notes for the student. So we love the automated note taking, and we're not counting on people who might be sick or absent that day. And honestly, it's just a higher quality service. That is it's just really great. It's fantastic. So it's new to our office. But when you see that, that means that basically an AI note taker will be providing notes for the student, and allow frequent breaks during classroom instruction, right? So that student is then protected under their accommodations to take a break, right? And just to take a breather for a second and come back, right? Um, this area, the additional notifications, I strongly recommend always scrolling down in your letter and reading through it. I also recommend um, making some kind of system for making sense of your letters as you get them at scale, right? Let's say you teach a large format course, you might have 10 or more accommodated students in your class. So then how do you make sure that you're providing everything, right? And how do you make sure that you know what everything is? And so having a system, kind of checking it when new letters come in, making sure that you know, and that you feel good that those accommodations are on board, is important, right? But sometimes you'll get these additional instructions, in this area or additional clarification, right? Allow noise canceling headphones during testing, opportunity to review test answers, right? Clear list of deadlines before tests, avoid surprise tests, and monthly check-ins like between student and SSD to make sure that the contracts are in. So this is some additional information that can be really, really helpful, but this is actually part of their assigned accommodations too, based on the student's functional limitations. Okay, that was a lot, but it's really, really important that you see real life examples, because as you can see from these 3 examples, it's different every time for every student, right? What to do as the term progresses. So if something changes, tell us. That could be testing, right? Like my environment changes. I change the rules on this test, the date's changing. Behavior, right? Like if the student is more and more anxious or even less and less anxious, where they're like, oh, I got this now, I'm good, right? And I've seen both and I've heard of both. Tell us, it helps us at SSD to know. Stress, performance, or implementation. If you're like, yeah, the class is just so busy that like I don't have a way to move the alternative desk to the front, because it's too slammed in there, right? Like tell us. If for some reason, as the term progresses, something changes or gets in the way of you providing these accommodations, if you're a yes, but your environment is a no, tell us. We want to help however we can. We're not in class with you, right? We're not in the spaces that you're in. I'll give you an example, outside the classroom, right? I was going to use the elevator today with a rolling cart because I was bringing a bunch of supplies somewhere. And the elevator opened and there was a repair technician in the elevator. And they said, I'm turning the elevator off. And I'm standing there with my rolling cart and thinking about all of our SSD students. I was like, but the other elevator's out. They're like, yeah. I was like, so are there no elevators right now? And he said, yes, right now there are no elevators. I was like, oh, okay, right. And so what I did was I dragged all my own stuff downstairs by hand and I notified SSD, hey, I think that I was just notified that they turned all elevators off in this building. I wanted to let you know, right? And so if you're noticing something that could impact, your students or anything that's happening, that could change as the term progresses, right? Tell us. It's really, really helpful to know. Let's say you notice an accommodation that's like not helping or not working, right? Hey, I noticed that the student receives note taking, but they've actually told me on 5 separate occasions that they never review the electronic note taking. That's really helpful to know. Maybe that's not the best accommodation for the student. We can adjust accommodations as terms progress too. Like if something's there that's not helpful to them or they're not using, or something that you think maybe should be there that you might notice before someone else notices, tell us, right? We're not in class with you. So it really, really helps the accommodation office to know from you, and they want to know. We want to be collaborators and partners with all of our faculty colleagues, because it's through that open flow of communication and an open heart and an open mind that really all of our students succeed, including our students with and without disabilities. Right. So closing tips, you've got this. Communicate early and often. And remember, you don't have to go through it alone. You are not an island in a sea of 25,000 other islands, right? You are in a city of 25,000 people in a city together, right? So the institution is here to support this effort, and like, let them. Don't feel like you have to go it alone. Right. Resources will be available, but I have faculty office hours for hours and hours every week. There are faculty SSD videos, faculty glossary. There's a policy one sheet. And I'm happy to go to any of your departments or spaces as well. And I wanted to, right now I'm still recording. Usually for Q&A, I'll like turn off the recording, but before I do, we have an amazing guest who's here with us today. So I wanted to give an opportunity for if Rivas wants to share anything or add anything to what I just said. Rivas actually works in the SSD office and is this incredible asset to our accommodations efforts here at Cal State San Bernardino. So before I close it out into an unrecorded segment, I wanted to open the floor to her, because I have the feeling she might have some really helpful and amazing additions to share with on this topic.
Sure, yeah. Well, hello. My name is Stephanie. I'm the Access Support Specialist at SSD. I'm essentially here to kind of assist faculty as well with accommodations as well, and going through those I would say like ropes, I would say in a way. So with accommodations, I know like I always take into consideration when faculty comes in that it could be their first time having a student with that has our accommodations. And there's going to be so many questions that faculty should ask us. I mean, if anything, coming in and asking front desk if anyone's available. Everyone at SSD, we're all passionate about helping our students and also helping our faculty members as well. It's not just one-sided. It's us being able to assist everyone in answering everyone's questions. Just like professors tell us, there's no dumb question, and there really isn't. If I take all questions to face value, honestly. So yeah, with SSD and accommodations, I would say like we're all here for faculty members as well, not just our students.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rivas. I appreciate it. So yeah, I mean, that is a little bit more about navigating your accommodation letters as you receive them. Talk to the office, stop by the office, talk to me, stop by my office hours. You have a city here to support you. Please approach everything with an open heart and an open mind, and we will get you to a really, really good destination together in collaboration. So that's it for today. And thank you so much. I'm going to turn the recording off now. And if there are any questions from the audience, I will take them.